Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. And viewing the world through the lens of showmanship is exactly what we're going to talk about today. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your host and your guide along the way, as always. And the topic is how to view the world through the lens of showmanship, which we will get back to in a moment. But last week we spoke about showmanship and the showman's craft and what that was. And the reason why we did that was so that we can know when we're trying to go back to the very beginning, trying to find the very origins of something, we need to find something to hold on to, something which remains the same as the thing changes through time. So to do that, we looked at what showmanship was, and I'm not going to go through all the details because that you can go back and listen to. But it does have to do with this dimension that opens up when a showman and an audience meets, this interaction where I would argue that all human culture springs from. And we looked at Henri Corbin, as he might be called in a Bukowski novel, and how he described this thing as the imaginal realm. So that was kind of the topic we spoke about last time, and that was what I then referred to as the inner ear of showmanship, which was referring back to the bones that remained the same throughout the evolution of the whale from a four-legged dog-like creature. So that's what we did last time. And in the next episode, we are going to get back to this and then view it through the lens of showmanship. But no, not through the lens of showmanship. We're going to view it through the lens of geometry. But today, before we sort of take any further steps along what it is that I've come up with, that I'm going to tell you about play and about showmanship and about all these things, I thought that it could be valuable to spend some time talking about this thing that the podcast starts with. I'm saying we're going to view the world through the lens of showmanship, but if this is a genuine way to view the world, then I should be able to pass on to you how this is done, how do I look, and what is this lens. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So let's play that sweet little tune. Alright, so the lens of showmanship and how to see through this lens. So in every episode of the podcast, I start by saying that what we do along the way is to view the world through the lens of showmanship. So what does that really mean? It's a question that comes up infrequently every now and then in conversations once in a while when I meet a fellow traveler such as yourself along the way. And in all of season 2, we talked about what I have seen through that lens, the showman as facing the other way, etc., the inner and outer life of a showman and whatever it was that I spoke about. But I didn't talk in that season at all about the actual way of seeing or the lens itself. And what does it mean to look at something through a lens? And I first explored this, and it was sort of brought to my attention when I explored it on this podcast when Jay Gilligan asked me about it at the end of a long conversation in Helsinki in January in 2023, which is pretty much exactly a year ago. And that conversation became episode 73, so if you haven't already listened to that, you can go back and check it out, and it's called My Secret Approach to Creation. So it's thanks to Jay that I first got on this track of contemplating it and trying to actually sort of express this and to foreground it as an actual method. Because to me, it's just the way that I have viewed the world, and it's, so I haven't scrutinized it, but I have done that. I did that in that episode, which was sort of, as you could hear, the ideas unfolding in time. But now I'm going to try to do it one more time with a little bit more, I've had more chance to think it through. But whether it is possible to teach this as a sort of method or whatever, I don't know. It's not like it was something that I decided to do ahead of time, or that it was something that someone taught me. It's merely me now trying to describe this process that I have for viewing the world with the benefit of hindsight and analysis. And so let's see where this goes. And in doing this, we will wander along circuitous, meandering paths. We'll encounter metaphor, cell biology, and in the next episode in particular, we'll spend some time with geometry and triangles in particular. And all of these little scenic departures will be explored with two goals in mind. To first look at how to look through the lens, and then we will deal, and this will mainly deal with metaphor, and then we will deal with the lens itself, which is the framework of showmanship. So this episode today is going to be closely linked with the episode that comes out in 2 weeks. So let's first look at metaphor. So, and when we look at geometry or anything through the lens of showmanship, any subject, then we are obviously in metaphorical territory. I'm always seeking to find connections and relations and ways to map one thing with another. I think that's just part of how I'm screwed together. Maybe it's the result of the Waldorf education, the Steiner School education. Maybe it's just a thing in myself, my philosophical outlook. I don't know. But connecting one thing with another, and that other thing, which I then happen to connect things to, at least today, these days, that is usually some aspect of showmanship. And I believe that a metaphor, like this way of looking at things, is a kind of living thing. A metaphor is an access way into reality. And in Aristotle's book, Poetics, he has this to say about metaphors. He says, "The greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. It is the one thing that cannot be learned from others, and it is also a sign of genius, since a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in dissimilars." The greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor. It is the one thing that cannot be learned from others, and it is also a sign of genius, since a good metaphor implies an intuitive perception of the similarity in dissimilars. So, Aristotle, he was a smart fella, had a lot of good stuff to say, but so in here he says that you can't really learn to create powerful metaphors, but Aristotle be damned, I'm still going to do my best in describing this metaphorical way of looking in hope that it will be useful for you, simply because it has been so very useful for me as a person, but also as an artist. And I don't expect to be able to say the final and finished thesis on this that will allow you to instantly become the master of metaphor. But since Aristotle also thinks that being able to do so, to create metaphors, is a sign of genius, it's perhaps a worthwhile pursuit for us both. I'll do my best at explaining it, knowing that I'll fall short, and you'll do your best at grasping it, giving your particular circumstances. And then, perhaps, like a Zen koan, offering a sudden glimpse of the nature of existence, our collaborative effort might be worth it. The first step is to ponder further on metaphor for a while. So, a metaphor is to be able to look at one thing and see a similarity between two seemingly unrelated things. As he said, an intuitive perception of the similarity in dissimilars. So, two things which are not the same, yet when looked at in a certain way, excluding certain parts or focusing only on certain other aspects, it will make the two things connect. That allows you then and affords you insights that about both of them as you see what is the same, and also what you discover what's different. And the fact that they are unlike but not completely the same gives a certain resonance, like two bells with chaotic overtones struck at the same time and harmonizing as they're being struck, but they're also, because of the chaotic overtones, being slightly off key. The word metaphor literally means to carry over or to transfer or to alter and change. And this thing carry over, like one thing being carried over into a relationship with something else, can give a wonderful sense of illumination. Again, like a Zen koan, it can give glimpses of immediate understanding. As if you're trying to learn something new, then a good metaphor that likens what we don't understand or don't yet know with something that we do know, that's when we can get a sudden understanding as we spot the similarities through all the dissimilarities. So if you don't understand anything about one aspect, if you all of a sudden see that it is like something else that you actually do know, then you might make great headway into mastering that new thing. And I'm not going to go too deep into this, but George Lakoff and Mark Johnson wrote a book a while ago in the 80s, I think, called The Metaphors That We Live By. And that book goes really deep into this and also really very convincingly argues that this way of applying the frame of something that we know to something that we don't know lies at the heart of the process of thinking and learning. They make basically the claim that metaphors is how we think. It's how we understand the world. And to them, metaphor is, it is a quote, metaphor is one of the our most important tools for trying to comprehend partially what cannot be comprehended totally. So you're standing before some phenomenon that you don't understand, but by seeing that whatever this is a little bit like something that you do understand, then you can begin to grasp it. And they start from the thing which we all share, and that is the human body. And the human body has an up and a down, a left and a right, and a front and a back. And they show how we use this embodied framework to literally grasp more abstract things like time, space, and work, and feeling, and so forth. It's like they say, oh, we're feeling down. I felt super high today, whilst the feeling isn't really a spatial thing. Or like we might see how in just that last sentence when I just said, or just before when I said like that I'm grasping more abstract things, that we're using a bodily metaphor. We say to grasp them, and grasping is something that we do primarily with our hands, and we grasp solid objects. But here it also means to understand something, and to understand it is also a spatial, bodily, relational expression. We understand it. We might say, "Oh, do you see what I am trying to say here?" Like, and he doesn't mean that. Do you see what I'm saying with your eyes? We mean it in another way. So. It's an interesting thing to look into, and I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this, reading the depths of it in their book, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson's book, The Metaphors We Live By, and also their book called Philosophy Made Flesh, which is a little bit more complex, I guess. It's more philosophical, more wide-spanning than Philosophy Made Flesh. I'll make some links to that in the show notes for those who are interested in it. But there is some great work being done by people who are a lot smarter than me that talks about how important it is. And in fact, maybe the fact that we can think at all is because of metaphor. Because there is, of course, this aspect that when some people, oh, it's just a metaphor, when you're reading a poem or you're reading a story or something, and goes, it's not actually real, whilst it might actually be that the metaphors is the only way that we actually can access into reality through our imaginative capacity. So that might also then be another argument for why it's great to explore metaphor. And even though Aristotle says we can't learn it. We should at least strive towards being able to create these metaphors ourselves. So showmanship as a lens, let's look at that, because the lens of showmanship is not just a lens that I have sort of randomly chosen. It's the lens that is the sum of my life's work as a performer and as a creative artist, because this is the lens that's being afforded to me because it's the thing that I am, for what it's worth, that I'm actually an expert in. And I'm not saying that because I fancy myself as important or higher or more knowledgeable than anyone else, but through decades of practicing and practices in both performing and in creating material in the form of acts and shows, I've developed a certain expertise. So in a very practical way, I've used, a considerable amount of my time and attention and will exploring showmanship, both in a practical sense as a performer and a creator, but also as a committed thinker trying to grasp what on earth it is that I'm doing with my life. So alongside circus and showmanship, I've had a great many interests, literary, scientific, academic, and poetic and artistic, but since I all along the way have made a living from doing shows, and all the content in those shows had to come from me. The things that I read and the exhibitions that I saw and the lectures that I watched, whether it was live at the Royal Society's buildings in London or online, and the music that I listened to and the books that I read, in short, all of my other interests found their way into my performances and fueled my creations in one way or another. So never completely, like that I just read a chapter from a book or whatever, but so it wasn't in the same way that I took them in the same form, but pieces and flavors transformed and combined in me and made me who I am, and thus inspired the art that I created. So the showmanship is a very deep part of me. It was and is my calling or my vocation, the one thing which has been constant in my life from I was about 10 years old. And the creative nature of this vocation or craft lent itself excellently to teach me to see the aspects in one thing, which, when combined and put alongside something else, would become something worthy of being presented live in front of an audience. Because there's a pressure of being, when you're being a so-called novelty artist or performer or showman, that you have to present new and unusual things for the amusement and enlivening of others. So, and the pressure applies a sort of, it's a constant pressure for finding new novel things to show to people. And novelty is an important aspect of showmanship. People love the new, the latest and the surprising, and showfolk over the centuries have become expert at finding the new or repackaging the old in new ways that makes it relevant and novel again. And this constant pressure kept training my eye or my attention towards metaphor, seeing how one thing could be itself differently by changing its context or manipulating it in ways unrelated to its intended use, which is like this springboard for something new or interesting, like seeing a hat as a juggling object or a set of buckets as a stairway to heaven. And as a note of things to come, what I've just described, this process of taking one thing to this, is just reeks of play. The self-motivated explorations of new and novel games and new ways to recombine and see something fresh in the old, that's nothing if not playful. So yeah, that's kind of why showmanship is the lens, because it's this thing that's just been a huge part of my life all the time. So, and I constantly have to create new work and stay relevant and come up with the right ideas and be able to express myself when I'm collaborating with people. That's how that's become the lens, because it is what I do, and it is also what I like to do. So it's my way of being creative in the world. So let's look a little bit at the sort of mindset that's necessary. So, 'cause to be able to make these kinds of pictures and ideas make sense and illuminate each other, two things that you put up against each other that are similar but also dissimilar, then I find that there's a certain mindset that's important. And this is in many ways the same kind of stance that an audience has, like an idealized audience, as we described in the previous episode. Like, what's the nature of an audience? It's a kind of, what is the state of mind for them? It's like a state of open interest, a quiet reaching out towards whatever subject you're engaged with or whatever objects you're paying attention to. And when I say quiet, I mean to not struggle to connect your circus or showmanship to whatever it may be. But since this vocational frame is in you, and it is in me at least, it's like fully and completely in there, so I can trust that it will come to the fore when the time is right. When we looked at it before, like a metaphor, if there's something that I don't understand, I will just try to connect it to something which I do understand, and more often than not, the ideas that come to the surface is related to performing. So this mindset is not about forcing a particular aspect of your juggling practice onto cell biology. Although, as a director and co-creator, sometimes this is the right and only way to go about creation. If this explicit goal of saying something about cell biology through juggling, which was a random example that I wrote at that point, but as it turns out, it's going to be following us now for the next little bit. So, like, because I might not want to think about that, but if I'm asked by Jay Gilligan that he's now taking on biology and we're going to discuss how it can relate to juggling, then this, of course, is a sort of a specific creative impetus for a development or whatever. But for now, we'll sort of concentrate a little bit more on this more as a way to view the world in general, as a cultivated approach one can adapt towards the world. So we're going back to this idea of the process as a quiet reaching out, because that's kind of what we talked about last. To attend is to kind of to reach out towards it, from that Latin word attendere, or whatever, however you pronounce that, is to reach out. And I'm sort of, when I tried to describe this approach in episode 72, I called it active reading. And by this I meant active in the way that I'm not just passively receiving what's in the book. I'm actually reading. As I read it, I am trying to connect it to myself. And that means that whether I'm reading a book then about cell biology or I'm reading a book on play, I read the book as if it's written as a personal conversation with me, as if the author has written it to me about the things that I am interested in. And to kind of try to flesh out this how to reach out, or how these ideas sort of connect together. Maybe just we're going to stick with the cell biology example to illustrate the mindset. Say that I'm actively engaged in grasping the incredible complexity of a single cell. I'm watching some YouTube videos or whatever. And all the while, my mind has this topic of showmanship running on silent in the background of my mind, because that's just how things are. Whenever I encounter something in there, I try to understand it for itself. But if I really don't understand what some organ inside the cell is doing, then if I can understand it as something which I already understand, then all of a sudden it's much easier to grasp it, or that's what actually affords me understanding of it. So, I'm always, part of the reason why it's also showmanship is always running on silent in the background is that I'm always actively working on something in relation to my work, be it a practical thing about an upcoming gig where I have to change something, or some more complex philosophical ideas for this podcast or whatever. So that's there in the background, ready to be like shallowly beneath the surface whilst I'm watching this video on YouTube. And then it's like the showmanship is there as the lens, ready to be looked through at any time. So, but as I then watch the cell biology lecture and attempt to grasp what I'm taking in with all its foreign vocabulary and the bizarre strangeness of the microscopic scale, then the sum of my experiences as a performer and all the frames that affords me for understanding the world and my work and myself lies in me as a kind of structure ready to be picked up. So all what I've already grasped is a lot of that is directly related to circus or magic or showmanship and a whole lot of other stuff that I've come to know and understand. That all lives within me. And although due to the sort of aforementioned pressure or desire to create and discover novelty and to see something at a slant, to use Emily Dickinson's apt phrase, is always there in the background. I'm ready to look at something through this angle, because then the thing about cell biology will be immediately, oh, this is a great connection here, and I can talk to Jay about it for his new project or whatever. So when I try to understand something, I use the framework and the frameworks that I have the deepest understanding of, and that takes up the most real estate in my brain, to shed light on what I don't yet understand, in this case then, cell biology. So in a sense, I'm looking for links to showmanship also when I'm not looking for it, if that makes any sense. But this is the way of the showman. Trying to grasp something, I will have to look for frames that I already know, that I can then help transfer, that can then help transfer me from the shore that I don't know to the shore that I do know, to make connections that affords me understanding. That's the metaphor. It's carrying me across. And it happens without trying, since the process of understanding, my attempts at sense-making uses this metaphorical machinery of frame shifting as a part of my thinking process. So a difference in adopting this stance, the sort of viewing the world through the lens of showmanship stance, is that I am aware that I am seeking it. Like when we're doing the podcast here, it's like I am aware that I'm now seeking how the world looks like through this lens. And then when something comes to me and I'm waiting for it, I'm sort of there viewing it with I'm hoping that something comes, almost like I'm sacrificing time and attention towards this thing. And then when it gives me something, I'm waiting for it with my hands open and ready to welcome it, whatever it may be. And I don't, because that's what it feels like. It's like I'm getting something. It's not like I feel like I'm making stuff up. In a very real sense, I think that's sort of the opposite of what I'm doing. Instead, I'm gently and humbly approaching what comes in, and I hope that I'll thereby sort of allow myself to get close to whatever it is that I meet and get into it enough what I'm paying attention to, so that the connections can emerge. So in the moment of writing, without much depth, my best attempts at gently reaching out towards the random example of cell biology brings together in my mind the idea of how a single-cell organism perhaps could be understood in my framework of showmanship as similar to a short single act, like a world-class circus act of the kind you might see at Monte Carlo Circus Festival. Is those kinds of acts that has been worked for decades. They will be filled with details and aspects. There's a lot of internal structure and components in the act, from costume, choreography, and pacing to the actual skills and their ordering to make it into a whole. This is much like the single-cell organisms that are also well-crafted, complex things, and the acts are then well-crafted, and mature acts that have worked for years, if not decades, have individually and as a type of act almost endless variation and complexity. There's lots and lots of details inside them. Just like there's all these crazy organs that does all kinds of amazing stuff inside just the single cell. So this is just quite a shallow kind of thing, but this was what came to mind when I was actually writing this down for the first time and thinking about it. So once I've made this kind of connection, then it also occurred to me that, well, if we think of a short act as a single organism, then perhaps a whole show, like a circus program, like an actual circus, could perhaps be metaphorically related to a multi-cell organism. Many single cells can join together and form new wholes, new organisms with entirely different life cycles and different abilities than single cells. So in a similar way, several artists with their acts can connect their many acts to each other and form their own show or circus, and connecting two or many acts and placed in an organic living structure where the several acts can become a new whole. They become a new show, much like cells in union form organisms, such as you and I. We are complex, connected, multicellular organisms. So this idea of a single cell organism as an act and a multi-cell organism as a show or as a circus, that was the first thing that came to mind in this pretty much freestyling, real-time first pass of what came to my mind when I did a cursory glance of cells and let my frames of showmanship come to the fore without censoring it. So it's not groundbreaking stuff, and since it's improvised and on the spot, the example lacks depth. But this very fact might demonstrate how the process works. Now that this connection was given to me, for that's what it feels like I mentioned before, like it feels like it's something, it's a thought and an idea that's already there to be discovered rather than that it's invented by me. I could continue to work with it and see how deep it goes. But I won't pursue this now. Instead, we are going to move over to move away from biology, and we're going to move into geometry as we move on here now. Not like Sam Cooke, who didn't know much about biology or much about geometry, but yeah, he knows a lot about love though. So anyway, and I'm going to cut this a little bit short now, and we're going to do all the stuff about geometry in the next episode. Yeah, so when I wrote this, I wrote what we just talked about and what will come in the next episode as one big chapter. But I realized that since almost the entirety of the next one is about geometry, and this is a kind of what we will do in the next episode is to really delve into a more elaborate metaphor of showmanship, connecting it with the geometry, which sounds to most people, I realize that this sounds a little bit boring, but the simplicity of the geometric shape, the triangle, which we will look at, will afford a very easy illustration to keep in your mind, and as it develops, almost like a symbol that you connect more and more things to it, it really can afford some great insights. So we're delving into that next week, and until then, why don't you go over and follow us on Instagram, see what's happening there with the big giveaway. Have you been one of the lucky ones that are now awaiting a t-shirt in the mail? Yeah, go over and see what happens. Follow us on for more exciting updates over there. And, the best advertising that I could possibly ask for would be if you told a friend. Come and check out what's going on over there at the Way of the Showman podcast. They're doing some crazy long form in this time of short attention span and scrolling. There is a very long form, elaborate exploration of showmanship. Eventually, apparently he's even going to get to talk about how it relates to play, and that's going to hopefully blow your mind as much as it has blown the mind of yours truly. So, yeah. it's great that you're listening, and it's great that the podcast continues to grow. It's a very slow growth kind of thing, but it's steadily going upwards. And as I've mentioned previously, the last few months have all been the biggest months that we've had. So even though I've halved the amount of episodes that came out as when we first started this, it came out every week during the pandemic when I had more time, and now we are still having more episodes downloaded a month, so we're doing really good here, and I thank you for that. The slow spread, the slow growth, the grassroots growth, that's thanks to you. So until next time, take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.